Welcome to Class 7, where we will continue on with the wire removal shot and complete the paintwork, which will then be followed by the shot finishing portion. So even though we're headed into some hand paint, I do want to incorporate some automation where possible. So I'll begin the paint with using the source match move workflow. So I'm going to make an ROI so I can save some memory. I'm going to turn on the ROI box right here, and I'm going to drag the ROI to make my image smaller, or make the area smaller inside where I'm going to be working. I'm going to turn off the ROI outline, and I'm going to cache the shot. So source match move is good for a couple different painting scenarios, and one of them is for when you want to use a source frame to paint from, but you don't want to fuss with offsets. So for this situation, it works because we don't have a lot of lighting changes in the shot, and what I'm painting out is a moving wire, and it doesn't sit over the same area in the plate. So if I kept manually painting over the same area, it wouldn't look correct, and a clean plate would probably be best for that situation. But for here, we're going to stabilize part of the sky, and we're going to paint in the stabilize mode. And we'll start with this upper right corner. Okay, I'm going to bring in a roto node. And I'm going to make my roto shape to track this upper right corner. Shift T will bring up the tracker panel. I'm going to use the Mocha tracker down here with the translation, scale, and rotation, and we'll track forward. Okay, I see it's starting to fail right there. I'm going to go to my timeline and just delete those keyframes I don't want, that where the tracker had failed. I'm going to select the keyframes inside of the timeline here down at the bottom, and then I'm going to press delete while my cursor is inside the timeline. So now I no longer have the keyframes that I don't want. So now I'm going to hook up, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to name my layer here. I'm going to call this screen right sky stabilization. Okay, and I'm going to hook up my roto node to my paint node using the object output and inputs. These are where you can hook up your tracking so that my paint node can utilize tracking that I did in the roto node. So if you go to the paint node here, I click transform. I don't want the screen right sky stabilization, and then I'll go up to my icon up here, and I'm going to click the screen right sky stabilization here. I've done this before, you can see that. And then I'm going to set up the rest of the parameters inside the paint tab here. I'm going to unclick relative, so that means I'm going to use this frame as my source frame. I'm going to click source match move. I'm going to make my source the foreground because I want to use that foreground as my same frame I'm painting from. I don't want to use an output. And then I make sure subpixel is turned off. And I'm going to click to the alpha and make sure I'm going to be painting white. I'm just going to double check that my source is set to transparent. It is down here, which means I have a black alpha. And here we are in the paint node, and we can play this through. So you can see up here that the area is stabilized, and I can start painting out my wire. So I'll zoom in here. I'm going to go to paint out this wire. I'm going to click the caps lock just to make sure it's lined up how I want it. It looks good. I like to paint with as large a brush as possible when I paint out these wires. I'm going to start with 100% opacity. I always like to paint with 100% opacity when I initially paint out the wire, and then if I have to go back and do some edge blending or just a little bit of touch up, I might use a smaller brush with a lower opacity. So right now we're just going to paint this area here. First I need to make sure that my view is on output. Okay, there we go. And we can paint out our wire. And if I click caps lock again, I can make sure that my source frame wire, there's still a wire in my source frame, but it's not nearby. So I just like to make sure if it was close, then I'd have to paint with a smaller brush or be a little bit more careful. So I'm just painting this out. And I can do a little bit of the mountains, but because the mountains and trees might move a little bit different than the sky, I just want to be careful for that. And then we'll check the alpha, the overlay. And sure enough, we have this where we're painting. And then when we're done, we can just turn off this shape for the roto and it will not appear in our alpha. In fact, we could do that right now. If I go to the roto node and I can just turn this off. I go back to paint, then I just have my alpha for my paint. So let's do a few more frames. And we'll do just one or two more. So now that we're careful to our source frame, we're near it, we just want to be a little more careful. Maybe I'll paint with the overlay on. And then when we paint this first frame here, we can just manually change our source to another frame, a couple frames down to make sure that we have a clean source for this first frame. So now you can see that the wire's painted out, and that makes for pretty quick work, even though we can only use the source match move workflow for the first part of the shot. It's definitely going to save us some time. So I'm going to turn off the stabilization here to none, and then we'll take a look at the screen left side where there are some motion blurred wires here as well. So while we could use the same technique for the screen left side over here, I might just manually paint them out because there seems to be a little more focus change over on the left side. And I can't use it for as many frames because we have interference of these bushes, these foreground bushes. So I'm going to just take down the gamma in the viewer. I'm just going to, so we can see the wires a little bit better. And we'll just manually paint out a couple frames. I'm going to turn off source match move. I'm going to turn on relative. I'm going to make my source the output. And I'm going to look for a few frames to paint. So I have this wire here. It's hard to see, but I think I can use the frame before. And so we'll set some offsets here. If we want to use the frame before or the frame after, or maybe 2 frames before or 2 frames after to get a clean area to paint from. And how you do that is you go down to the paint presets here. So say I want to be, we can set our offsets from here. I'm going to just reset that here. So if I want to use the frame before, I'm going to click that. So now you can see this frame is 1 frame less than the frame I'm viewing. I'm going to click save and 1. And now I have that as a preset. So then if I want to use the frame after, I go to the frame after, click save and 2. And then maybe I want to use 2 frames prior. So I go to 2 frames prior is 76, click save and 3. And then I'm going to do 2 frames after my source frame. And then we have that all set up. And then you can use hotkeys for that, which is Alt 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can make up to 10 presets. So Alt 1, Alt 2, Alt 3, Alt 4 will cycle through your presets. So I wanted to use, let's go back to the frame we were going to paint. Let's find that wire, this one right here. And I'm going to use the frame before. So I'm going to click on my preset here, caps lock. And now I'm going to have to do some manual lining up. We'll zoom in. So caps lock, I'm turning on the overlay. You can use the onion skin here, but I'm going to use the overlay. Zoom out, make my brush even bigger, and I'm going to paint out the wire. If I'm getting close to the bushes down here, I'm going to just make my brush a little bit smaller and take care to not go into any of those areas. So you can see if I cycle the alpha on, that's where I've painted. And then we'll do one more frame. So there's a couple motion blurred wires coming across here. So for this frame, we'll use the frame before as well. I'm using the arrow keys to nudge my source into place. And we'll do some painting. So you can see that when I'm painting that my cursor disappears, and that is a paint preference in the preferences. So I like it when I paint that I can see my image a little bit, I can see my image more clearly if I don't have the cursors in the viewer when I'm actually painting. But that's a preference, and everyone has a different way they like to paint. So I'm going to make my brush smaller, make sure I get down here into these areas. If I'm not sure how close I am, I can turn on the alpha. And then maybe at this point, I'm going to take down the opacity of my brush and just kind of touch in here to not take out the leaves too much here, but just kind of paint out the wire where it might be right next to it. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to paint out wires in the sky. Okay, next we're going to move on to doing some wire removal over the mountains. You can see that I've turned off my ROI and I've turned off the stabilization to none, and my brushes are all set to how I want them. So there's no preset workflow for painting out wires. What you're doing is you're looking for frames to pull from that don't have any wires. So here we have this section where we have kind of the rig where the wires come together, where they're holding up the actor. And we're going to try to find frames to paint this out. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for what would be a suitable frame to paint out kind of this section here. And I'm looking at the quality of the motion blur. So here I think, well, I'm going to try to use the frame before. If I go too far before, it's really not going to match. So I want to be close, but I don't want to use the same frame over and over. So it's a little bit of back and forth and making sure that you have some options to pull from. So here I'm set on the frame before. I'm going to click caps lock and I'm going to line up my source with the arrow keys. And with the way the camera moves, there's definitely some distortion. So I'm going to zoom in so I can really see, and I might have to have multiple offsets for the same frame. And zoom out a little bit. So my pink cursor here is where I'm painting from, and the green is the offset. So I'm going to be painting as much as I can. If I know that, okay, now it's a little bit too high up here at my source, I can see it's not lined up, I'll just click the arrow key down and see how much of the work I can get done with certain offsets, moving them along as I go. So you can see I only got this side of the wire and I have to take care of that side. So let's see if I can use the frame after for that. And you can also see when I'm painting, as I start painting, my cursor disappears, and that's a preference in the paint preferences, but you can have it left on if you like as well. And that's the default. But I like to have it off so then I can see the area I'm painting when I'm actually painting, a little less obstructed. So you can see I still don't quite have enough to pull from, so I'm going to go to 2 frames after and see if that can get me a more clean area to paint from. And that's a little too high. And again, I'm painting with 100% opacity brush down here, and that's because if I don't, you will definitely see a shadow of the wire or a ghosting of the wire. You might not see it when you're actually painting, but you will see it when you play the shot back. So this is the general idea when you are painting wire removals. And it's definitely a little bit of a tedious process, but once you get the hang of it and you have a little practice, it works pretty well. And another tool that you have that you can use, but I don't think I need it for this shot, is the grade and filter. So say if if the lighting changed in the shot and now suddenly like there's a darker frame or a lighter frame, you can always adjust the color of your source and the lighting. You turn you're in the clone tool, you turn on the grade filter, turn on the split screen here, and now you see I have this arrow. So say if my source it was lined up, but if it was, say, too dark or too light, then you can change the gain or the gamma or even the different color, the saturation, all these different parameters, even the blur and the sharpen. And you can change that to match your, change your source to match what you're painting. And that's really helpful. So if I'm here, I typically hold down the Command key and I use the slider and split screen, and you can see now my source on the right is going lighter or darker. And that is a huge time saver, a game changer for me. You don't have to comp out plates that have lighting changes in them to use as a source. So I'll just reset that, and I will go back to the clone tool and I'll turn off the split screen. And next we'll do some painting on our actor here. So you can see not only we have the wires that are over the sky and the mountains, we also have the wires over the jersey here, and we also have a little bit of a rig here. And she actually probably has more of a body harness on, because when you're doing a kind of stunt like this, you need something to really keep them safe, and that's usually a harness that's under the clothing as well. So when I'm painting this out, this is all just frame by frame paint animation. I'm zoomed in here, and I'm going to just do a straight clone. I'm going to make sure I'm on the same frame. So I'm just going to click here to reset. I'm on the same frame. I don't have to reset the clone offset here, because I'm just going to do that when I'm on the frame and I'm setting it here with the caps lock or with the shift key. So if I want to paint this wire out here, so there's not really a frame I can pull from. It's just different on every single frame for much of this. I'm going to try with 100% opacity first. And I'm going to paint out the wire. And you can see here, I really don't want to paint this full color here. So sometimes maybe I'll try to find a similar color somewhere else. And I'll just paint it. That's too bright, Command Z. So there's a lot of testing, like what might work here. Is this too bright? That's too bright. And then maybe I'll just go something for a little bit darker. Otherwise, I'm stuck with painting, and that's even too bright, both sides of this wire. And that's, that can be really tedious. But I might have to do that in this case. Or I'll take down the opacity. And I'll do a little blending here. I could use the dual clone brush, but that could set up a lot of it could be time consuming to set up for each paint stroke. So I'll go back to 100%. I'm painting this out here, and then I'm going to paint out this little rig here. I can see there's some background through here, and then there. Yeah, so we're just going to keep painting on the same frame. I'm going to paint this out like that. I see a little green through here, so I need to add a little green back. And then another thing I like to do is that I'm painting it with no color correction in the viewer, but then you also want to change this and look at your paint to make sure that you don't have any lines that you don't want. So I'm going to up this. You can see if I zoom in here, you can see a couple areas here that might not be good. So I'm back in the clone tool. I might just take the opacity down. So shift, and I'm just going to get rid of some of these artifacts that I didn't see when I was painting initially. And remember, so I have the alpha here, so I'm a degrain and painting on a degrained plate, so I don't have to worry too much about messing up the grain. You can see I have my alpha, and we'll be replacing that grain afterwards. So then I'm going to reset there, and I'm just going to go down a little bit. So for the brighter areas, I think that's okay. But if I'm painting a large area here, I'm definitely going to, turn my viewer controls up and down to make sure that my painting looks correct. We're going to just try this area too. So we not only have wires, we have the shadows of the wire, which is just almost like another wire. So I'm going to go to 100%, change my brush size. And you can see you just want to be very close to the wire you're painting. If I'm far away, it's not going to match. And I don't feel like I can really do a frame before or after. I could maybe try with one frame there and then go on the other side. That's, it's a little bit trial and error. I'll take the opacity down. And we'll do a little blending like this. And then I have this area here. I have to make that look like it belongs there. Sometimes I'll just take a different area and paint it out like that. What looks natural. You can spend a lot of time doing this, and then I will, like I said, I will gamma down, see if I have any areas that don't look good, or gain down, and fix that. So here maybe I could use the frame after. So I'll go to my preset, which is the frame after. Caps lock. We'll go into overlay and see if we can line this up. So it's such an organic shape that the clothing that it's going to be hard to find a perfect match. But if you think you can use source part way, then I would go for it. And then just be careful not to bring in the line again. So it's a little bit, like I said, of trial and error. But at the same time, it's moving fast and it can be a little bit forgiving. And I'm going to try not to overpaint, which will make, and I refer to overpainting when it just starts, if I paint too much, it just doesn't even look like the original image at all. So I just try to do as little as possible to not make it too far different from what it really looks like. Okay. So now I've done a little painting of the background, the sky, and the jersey, and I'll show you some of the final paint. So here is my final paint. I'll just zoom out here. There are no wires in the sky over her. And we'll just play that. So before, after. So now that we have our wire paint done, we're going to focus on painting out the last task, last bit, which is painting out the actor and the bike where it is not covered up by my rock clean plate. So you can see here, I have I've made a comp in this source where it's my clean plate over the background, but I can still see where the blue pad is sticking out. So I need to paint that out where it's occluding the actor and the bike. So I'll just do a few frames here. So for example, if I want to paint out the bike in these frames here, I'm going to start with where I have, where I can get the biggest part of the bike painted, and then I can pull that through as I animate it through the shot. So I'm going to use this frame here, but I'm going to use the frame prior to get some of that bike. So what I have here, I have my paint source, I have my paint node, and I have sort of the comp piped in as an input so I can cycle through those. So up here in the view, if I'm clicked on the paint node, I have all these options as a view. So 1 is the output, 2 is the foreground, and 3 is this input here. Okay, so now I'm going to pull through frame before. I'm going to make sure that I am on output, and I'm going to click the interactive button here, and I'm going to set my source as the frame before, so it is set as before. And I'm going to click the caps lock here. So you see I have this overlay. And what I want to do is I'm going to sort of move it into place a little bit, but I'm also going to set the pivot point. And for any transformations I make, they will be done from this pivot point. I have my pen over, my Wacom pen over the pad, and it's just hovering. I'm going to press the period key. And now my pivot point is set there. So any transformations I do, like the rotation, you can see it's happening from that pivot point. So I'm going to just start making my adjustments here. I'm really trying to just line something up down here that I can use. So once I have it lined up, I'm going to click the interactive button again so it's turned off, and then I can start painting. And you can see that I'm pulling through the source, and I might just edit as I go along using the nudge, the arrow keys on the bottom to just nudge my source to where I want it. I need to get this bike handle, so I need to really move that over quite a bit. So I'm going to look again. What does it look like there? Well, it's pretty blurry, but I think for just one frame down at the bottom, it's going to suffice. So I line that up. I can see that's lined up, and I would paint the background separately than the bike because they would have different offsets for sure. And I just tried to get bike in here. I think that would work. I'm going to paint a little outside here and see what happens with that pedal. Okay, that might work. But then you can see maybe a few adjustments. And then I can carry that through, and I'll show you how I've done that as well. So here is my final paint. So now I've painted out. If I compare my reference to that, I've painted out the bike where I needed to paint it. I can see here that looks sloppy, but in this, when I go back to what my comp's going to look like, I don't need to go below this area. And so I don't need to be perfect down here just to save time. And I've also painted out some of the wires over the actor. You can see here, and some of the rig, the pad, she has like probably a harness underneath her clothing, and I've just smoothed that out a little bit. So you can see that. And then the paint here with the output, I've just smoothed that out a bit. So then let's take a look at her legs. Okay, now we can see that, okay, we've lost part of a leg here. So I'm probably going to use, and her foot here as well. So I'm going to use the frame before. I'm going to go to my paint tab here, and I'm going to choose, okay, let's use one frame before here, caps lock. So I need more than just an XY offset. I'm going to need to use the interactive tool and make a transform. So I see it's kind of lined up here. I'm going to go for the angle area right here. I'm going to click the period key, and then I'm going to interactively move my source into place. Click the interactive button again, and then I'm just going to paint the foot. And I'm going to just kind of go back and forth. Does that look right? Well, I can see this frame is a lot more blurred than the previous frame. So maybe I'll just do some blending with opacity. I'll just bring this down, and I'll just give it a little bit of the frame before. And I can always just go in with the clone tool, go to the same frame, and maybe even lower. And this is too dark here if we're really getting into the details, because we're trying to have it mostly perfect here, right? And then we'll just take some of that out so it kind of blends in a little bit better. And then I have this leg here, so I'm going to use the frame before in my preset. Click the caps lock. So here it's like a little more, it's almost not quite some foreshortening, but it's starting to change a lot. So I'm going to look for this knee area here, which might be more lined up. I'm going to click the interactive tool again. I'm going to click the period key, set my pivot, and see how much I can line up. So I'll click that off and make a big brush. And I'm trying to get some of this motion blur in here too. I'm trying to see if I can do this all in one plate. Otherwise, I would have to paint the actors separately, roto the actor parts, and then put that over my wire removal and in my comp. And while I can do that, these are just a few frames here. I'm going to see if I can just preserve the background and the actor at the same time, so they can just be one plate. So that's not quite working out. You can see, okay, the foot is rotating. So now I'm going to line it up at the heel. I'm going to click the interactive button, and I'm going to set my pivot at the heel and do some lining up. Still not quite there. I can see that I want to be lined up right here. And then let's give that a try. So I'm bringing in my foot. And we'll have to do a little more work around this ankle area because that doesn't quite line up. And then if I want to do a little blending, I can see here it's not quite blending well. All right, so then we'll just quickly compare the original to my comp and then my final output. So it's a little bit different when I painted it from painting it in the class. You can see here, but I don't need some of these areas. They're just completely covered. So I'm just really going up to a certain area. So when I'm here, you can see that I don't really need to paint every single thing. I just need to get down to a certain line. Okay, so now we're going to take my rendered paint here and we're going to put that back in the comp. Now that we have all of our paint done, let's put everything together. So now we're back into the screen left rock clean paint comp, and we're going to combine our elements. So here, you've seen this is where I have the clean plate. That's all done. And now I've brought in my wire removal paint here. I've gone down and I've color corrected this little shadow here. It was very blue. So I have done some color correction to match it to the other darker shadows in the plate. I've made some roto for my rocks, my foreground rocks, to go over my clean plate here. And I've done a little edge compositing. So now let's put it all together. So I have my composite there and my rocks over here. And we're down at the end so you can see right there. And now we have our output. So the last thing we need to do is add some grain. So we'll go over to the regrain session here. And now you can see where I brought in my output from my comp. And that is the, I'll just slide this over so you can see the name. It's the final denoised PNT V001. So here I have my original footage here. I have my wire removal here. And inside my wire removal, I have an alpha. So this alpha that I have, and I'll just cycle through like that, is what I'm going to be compositing over my original background with the paint and the grain. So I'm looking at my alpha and it's a little bit choppy, some transparent edges. So, and I had to add in my rock roto shadow. So sometimes at the end you find, well, I need to add a few more things. And so that's what I'm doing here. So I did a little matte repair and I wanted to beef up my alpha and make it mostly opaque. So I'm getting all of those edges in. So nothing will be left behind. I'll have all my paint and the grain in the right area. So we'll go back to that repair. And now we're at the grain stage here, finally. So I'm just going to pop off this grain node here. And I have matched the grain back to the plate, which I've shown previously how to do that. So we won't spend too much time here. So you can see that I've edited these values to match the original plate, and we'll go down. So we've composited that over. Let's go to see an area where we can actually see what we're doing. So if I go up to the sky, and I'm going to gamma down here, you can see some of that grain. So here is the alpha. It's the original, and then we painted it. So this is no grain here. We've composited back over, and we have the final output. So our paint and our grain is only in these areas. Okay, for one last look, I will just do a compare between before and after. And this is before. And this is the result. So this concludes Class 7 and the end of this course. I hope to see you in the next course, which will be part 2 of the Introduction to Silhouette and Paint.